The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute, I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad, this could be so magnificent.
President Donald Trump speaking at the White House yesterday as he hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here in Washington. The comments represent a stunning reversal of decades of American foreign policy. U.S. allies in the Arab world rejected the idea outright. Democrats called it crazy and insane. Republican reactions ranged from tepid endorsement to skepticism. And the media, well, we're left to try to sort it all out. Thankfully, we have Niall Stanage, the brilliant White House columnist here at The Hill, to help us out. Now let's put on our thinking caps here. Do you see any potential pitfalls to Trump's plan?
Oh, I see. How many would you like me to list? I mean, just on a practical level, you're talking about the United States going in as the occupying force in Gaza. That would be costly in money. I think it would likely be costly in blood. I don't think it would be acceptable to the population there. Then you get into the other issue of whether other neighboring Arab states would be willing to take the Palestinians in. There is no sign that they would be, partly because they worry about destabilizing effects on their own society, also because they don't want to collude in the destruction of the idea of a Palestinian nation. Also, you know, I know sometimes we veer away from emotive language, but it doesn't appear that Trump is talking about a voluntary movement. He's talking about shunting the people off.
U.S. troops possibly involved.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the definition of ethnic cleansing, is the forcible movement of a group of people on ethnic grounds, which seems to be what he's talking about.
Maybe this is an instance to take Trump seriously, but not literally, as the refrain goes. I mean, Gaza is destroyed. People there are living in misery. There's not really any sort of plan for a independent Palestinian state living peacefully beside Israel. Is this possibly the start of a conversation with the world about what are we going to do here?
I think what critics of that viewpoint would say is there are much more obvious ways that you can assist Gaza. If it is destroyed, you can give it money to rebuild. If there is not infrastructure, you can provide infrastructure. If people find the conditions uninhabitable, you can make those conditions inhabitable. That is completely different from moving an ethnic group out of the territory they currently occupy, out of an area that they have absolute legitimacy to consider their home, to some other place.
Got a range of reactions from Republicans in Congress. Let's take a listen to House Speaker Mike Johnson.
I think this is a good development. We have to back Israel 100%, and so whatever form that takes, we're interested in having that discussion. But it was a surprising development, but I think it's one that we'll applaud.
Could Trump get MAGA buy-in from this? Because, you know, this making the Middle East great again is not exactly the same as making America great again.
Well, it's not, and interestingly, some Republicans have made a version of that point. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, one of the Republicans who's most anti-interventionist in general, has expressed confusion about the idea that Trump supporters believe they were back in that America First policy. Trump himself has been much more skeptical of foreign intervention than a lot of more traditional old school Republicans. So for him to then propose this idea in such a tortured and tumultuous part of the world, I think is problematic. Some people will support him, but even Speaker Johnson there, that was pretty lukewarm.
Unrelated to Trump's comments, but also involving Israel, Senate Democrats have placed a hold on $1 billion in weapons sales to Israel. What are the Democrats trying to get accomplished here? And more broadly, what is the Democrats' policy toward Israel, the Israel-Palestine issue? It seems like they succeeded in angering both sides of the issue leading up to the elections last year.
It's a great question, I think, because the issue of Israel and the Palestinians divides the Democratic Party far more than it divides the Republican Party. So you do have very strongly pro-Israel Democrats. You also have people, particularly on the younger and more progressive side, who are much more pro-Palestinian. And that division is reflected in the American population as well. That's where we see younger people being more, having greater solidarity with the Palestinians. What the Democrats want to do, I think, is create some sort of symbolic resistance to these weapons going to Israel after a ceasefire agreement in Gaza. Of course, the difficulty, particularly people who are more pro-Palestinian would say, is, well, Democrats backed President Biden when he was shipping enormous quantities of arms to Israel over the course of the last 15 months.
I want to talk about, we learned yesterday that the Trump administration is starting flying migrant detainees to the military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. You know, that prison was established to house enemy combatants from the war on terror. What is the legal justification for housing migrants there?
So I think there's quite a lot of confusion, perhaps willful confusion around this. Where Trump is proposing housing migrants is literally Guantanamo Bay, but not the detention camp that is used for those so-called enemy combatants. There was, going back to the Bill Clinton era, the use of the US facility at Guantanamo Bay to house migrants. There are, I would say, elements of confusion around the legalities, but the broad plan or the broad principle is migrants who have certain due process rights here in the United States would still have those rights even if you move them to Guantanamo Bay. So the advantage, as Trump sees it, may be one more of symbolism and deterrence rather than actually changing the legal rights of those people.
It seems like the Trump administration is running up against this problem where it wants to detain and deport lots of people but doesn't really have the facilities to hold them. There's not actually enough room at Guantanamo Bay to house that many people. I mean, they want to put in 30,000 beds, but that's going to take some time. Enter Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador. He's a darling of conservatives, says he's willing to take not just migrants, but also possibly American citizen criminals. What do you make of that?
I think that the two categorizations are very important there. You could theoretically send migrants to third countries, and in fact we have done that before. They would not necessarily have to be Salvadoran migrants who would be sent there, but that is a very separate legal and constitutional question from the American government deporting American citizens to another country. In almost the universal opinion of legal and constitutional scholars, you simply can't do that and would face instant legal challenge if you tried.
Another roadblock for the the Trump administration's move to end birthright citizenship. A judge in Seattle blocked the move and put out a statement. I want to read a little bit of it here. The United States Supreme Court has resoundingly rejected the president's interpretation of the citizenship clause. No court in the country has ever endorsed the president's interpretation. This court will not be the first. Is the Trump administration out of options in its effort to end birthright citizenship?
No, because it could ultimately take the case to the Supreme Court, where it might hope for a more favorable hearing, given that, of course, there's a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court, and the justices there have ruled in Trump's favor in a number of other key cases. I think the difficulty for the Trump administration is getting over the legal precedents, which have held all the way back to at least 1898, that a person born here on American soil is, by that very fact, an American citizen. That's what Trump is trying to change.
All right, that's all I have for you, Niall Stanage. Appreciate you.
Good to be with you.
There are at least 11 dead and 5 seriously wounded after a gunman opened fire at an adult education center in Sweden. The event marks Sweden's worst mass shooting in its history. The country rarely experiences gun violence at schools and has restrictive gun laws. The tragedy took place in a town just west of Stockholm at a school that offers primary and secondary educational classes for adults 20 and older. They also offer Swedish language classes for immigrants and programs for individuals with intellectual disabilities. At this time, a possible motive has not been released, but there are no suspected connections to terrorism, and authorities believe the shooter acted alone. 3 women and 2 men with life-threatening gunshot wounds underwent surgery and are in serious but stable condition. Another woman is stable and was treated for minor injuries. The gunman is among those killed. The U.S. Postal Service has reversed course, revoking a previous suspension of incoming packages from Hong Kong and China. The Postal Service says it will resume accepting inbound shipments from China just hours after it halted service. USPS did not offer a reason for the suspension, but it also halted a common trade loophole that allows online retailers to send small packages worth under $800 to the U.S. without paying tax. The loophole is used by popular Chinese retail giants like Shein and Temu. It comes as President Trump has imposed an extra 10% tariff on all imports from China. There was an uproar in Washington this week after the Trump administration moved to shut down the federal agency that delivers aid to countries in need. In today's Political Minute, News Nation Now host Niall Stanage shares more on the U.S. Agency for International Development.
President Trump moves to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm Niall Stanage with News Nation. Now, this week it was Elon Musk who moved in to shut down this agency known as USAID. It was founded by President Kennedy to counter Soviet influence in developing countries. These days, it helps the U.S. in pushing back against China. Now, USAID accounts for less than 1% of the federal budget, but it provides assistance all over the world, from war relief in Ukraine to maternity care in sub-Saharan Africa. Critics, including the president, question its priorities.
I love the concept, but they turn out to be radical left lunatics.
All right, well, Musk closed down the agency building on Monday. Its websites were taken offline. This after President Trump froze foreign aid and senior officials and contractors were laid off or put on leave. Now the Secretary of State Marco Rubio says he's overseeing USAID, saying he'll push Congress to give it a major overhaul. I'm Niall Stanage. This is the News Nation Political Minute.
And you can find more news and analysis from Niall and our colleagues 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.